Yes, there is a messianic theme running. Matter of fact, this is fascinating to me, really fascinating. I read a book by Joseph Campbell called The Hero of a Thousand Faces. He also wrote a book about myth and culture and a bunch of wonderful material. And in there, he talks about how in almost every story, in every mythos, in every legend, in the history of the world, you have a certain parameter or template that every hero follows. And it goes something like this. So you have this hero who's from an unknown family, in an unknown village, in a forgotten part of the town or the world, who's called from a greater calling, from something or someone greater than himself. He hears the call, but hesitates because he's not worthy, and hesitates against it. But then after going through a period of struggle with the help of others, he embraces his calling. And he goes through that baptism to get ready to deal with the world. And in getting ready to deal with it, he faces some of his greatest temptations. Then he passes through those temptations. He succeeds to his own surprise. And then he faces his greatest enemy and fails. He falls flat on his face. He either goes bankrupt, he goes psychologically insane maybe, or even in some cases the hero is killed. But Joseph Campbell tells us, in all these stories though, he comes back. And somehow the hero defies all the odds and rises again from the ashes, stronger and more powerful than he's ever been before, crushes the enemy, restores peace to all the region, and is established as a Messiah-type figure who doesn't just take it and sits on his throne about it. No, he comes back to where he originally was, to his people in that old obscure town to bring peace, salvation, and hope to them. Does that sound vaguely familiar? This is actually the story of the Messiah figure in Jesus. It's echoed in Luke Skywalker. It's echoed in the Iliad and the Odyssey. It's echoed in Batman and Superman and Fantastic Four and all the great mythos and themes in history, whether you talk about J.R.R. Tolkien or even the Norse mythologies. They all have that theme in one way or another. The theme is there. And of course, there's some nuances of it and differences in stories, but it's there. And I think the Lord God planted it there so that we can see him in even the pagans. Didn't the Magi see the coming Messiah in the stars? C.S. Lewis said that he came to faith by reading one of the things that stepped him closer to the faith was reading the myth of Balder, who was a Greek mythology that was killed and came back. And the whole of heavens cried out when he died. It was a terrible predicament. All the creatures of all the mythos cried out when he died. And Hades, the god who held the Balder character, said, I will release him from death if every creature in all creation mourns for him. So all the main characters go out and try to convince everyone to mourn for him. There is, except one refuses. And this theme of a dying God who's trying to come back to save us resonated within Lewis. He said, who is this? Is there a reality to this? And he confronted Tolkien about it. He said, Tolkien, I read this Christ story. It's interesting. But I read about it in all the myths. It's just another myth. And you know what Tolkien told him? Tolkien, who's a convinced Catholic Christian, said, yes, it is a myth. It's a myth like the others. But here's the difference, Lewis. It's the myth that became real. It's the myth that walked among us. He is alive. And that sparked in Lewis an interest, saying, wow. And it was a few months later, where Lewis finally came around and gave his life to God and finally to Christ. So the mythos theme is everywhere if we just look for it. The mythos theme of Christ or the Messiah.